Well, I guess I have always been a person who believed that knowledge is empowering, that I feel empowered by knowledge. I went into teaching, and that certainly is the premise of teaching, that education gives you power. So I think that was probably the first thing that, came to me when I learned that the FDA had approved testing for certain neurological diseases in 2017. Everything from Alzheimer's to Parkinson's to, ALS. And I thought, okay, well, I'm too tired now, I'm working. I don't have time. But I retired in 2018. And I thought, look, there's been some cardiovascular issues in my family. My father had died at age 67. I'm 70. My mother had had a triple bypass at 72. And I thought, I know I'm going into the period where more problems occur as we get into our late 60s and 70s. You see it. Go to any doctor's office and you see it. My mother, and if I cry during any of this, please just give me a minute of composure. My mother, who I loved so much, had descended into dementia, into Alzheimer's, and she descended into this horrible abyss for about 10 years, 6 of which were absolutely horrible. She cried, she was confused, she became combative. She hit me one time so hard I thought she'd broken my rib cage. This is a woman who we dearly loved. And she disappeared. And there's nothing worse than watching somebody disappear. You beg them to come back. And you keep thinking, if I just remind you that I told you this 5 minutes ago, you're going to remember. And it is horrible. So I thought, well, knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. Let me see what comes back. And because the FDA just approved this genetic testing that 23andMe you could find out, I thought, okay, here goes. I retired. I send away the saliva kit. And I'm not optimistic, but I thought, well, I'll take what I get. Well, I open up the envelope when it came. And it said, as one of several things, along with one gene for macular degeneration, it said, you have not one, they didn't say not one, but I'm saying not one. You have not one, but 2 copies of the Alzheimer's gene, which gives you a 12-fold risk of getting Alzheimer's.
That was probably a real shock, wasn't it?
That was a shock. I went down a rabbit hole. I was so depressed for 4 or 5 months. And I thought, okay, I can do something. I don't have it yet. And I would say that I wish I had DNA testing earlier. I would have done it in my 30s if I could, because I could have started some of the things that they are finding out, those epigenetic factors, the exercise, the social, the healthier eating patterns. But I started those, and boy, did I start them with a vengeance. I had already been vegetarian, but I became pretty much vegan. I went to the Monon every day and still do, except for Saturday. I got a neurologist and he pounded into me, and he is wonderful. He works with Dr. Gutman. He said, you know, what's good for the heart is good for the brain. And so I keep up that exercise, I eat healthily, and I signed up for research because the research out there are salivating for people who have two ApoE4 genes. I'm one of 2% that have this propensity. So
Margot, you shared with me, and I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I'm cutting off a little bit here, but you shared with me that one of the hardest things was coming to grips. You had some very strong ideas about how you wanted to leave this earth, and also how you were going to, how do I tell my family?
yeah.
And so, was that easy?
Well, I think, let me just say that first of all, one of the reasons, probably the biggest reason I wanted testing is my mom had no advance directives. She had raised us girls, I have two sisters, and she'd said, you know, kids, when I get older and my body deteriorates, we're going to sit around, and maybe it might be from my hospital bed, we're going to talk about what we're going to do with me. You know, and she made it sound like, hey, we're going to choose a restaurant. And, you know, there might be some disagreement if one wants Chinese and one wants something else. And she never anticipated. She was terribly bright that it would be her mind. So she left no blueprint, no conversations about what she wanted. And I wanted the testing because I wanted to spare what had happened in our family. When she got it, the disease that ravaged her brain shattered our family. I have two sisters, and if there is no roadmap or somebody hasn't talked to you about what they would want, you end up there's disagreements. Kids have different temperaments. So 20 years after her death, my oldest sister and I still do not talk or have any contact with my middle sister. She
And
did
you
home-
didn't want that to happen.
And we
in your
didn't want
family,
that to
right?
happen, but she pushed treatments, pushed my mother through horrible surgeries, and made my mom's life so much worse. So I did not want this to happen to my son, my daughter, my family. And so I thought if I knew more about my genetic testing, this would happen. I could be more proactive. So I knew I also needed to update my advance directive, which had been done with Carol about 12 years earlier, but it was sort of generic, and my husband and I had said, we'll come back in 10 years when we're done, when we're retired, and we'll make it more specific. So when I came to Carol, I was fragile. I was so fragile. I cried probably a third of the time I was with her. She didn't hurry me. Her background of being in nursing, of having parents that she'd taken care of having this great legal background was exactly what I needed. And I had a plan. I knew I always wanted quality of days over quantity of days. I didn't want existence. I wanted to live. So it wasn't important to me how many days I stayed, but I didn't want bunches of treatments. So I had this sort of plan that I ran by Carol. Carol helped deepen the conversation. She took me where I stood, which was horribly fragile. And she didn't try and craft a cookie cutter advance directive. She listened to my values, my priorities, and we came up with this wonderful advance directive that I feel that it was like my master's thesis that I did. I got done and it was right down to, keep me warm because I'm always cold. And even if I'm not responsive, just pile lots of blankets on me. But Carol really helped in this. And I would say choosing somebody who you want to do your advanced directive with, make sure they have a broad background, they're empathetic, they're not going to do a cookie cutter approach. They're going to listen to you, and they're going to take you where you stand. So I went through 5 revisions. She'd send me.
But you also had to figure out what you wanted first.
Right.
You had to know really clearly, this is what I want, in order to
And
get
I do.
into those.
And I do. I have very clear ideas of what I want.
And then you had to tell your family.
And then I had to tell my family.
Did you sort of mess that up at the beginning?
Yeah, I did. Well, my husband knew right away, because he had been through this with my mother, with myself. My children are young when my mom, and the 3 sisters, we were all out of state from my mother in Montana. My own children were young at the time, but they saw me crying all the time. It had a big effect on them. So I told them after I came out of this rabbit hole and emerged after 4 months after getting those tests back, I told my children, and I said, this means you have 1 gene for Alzheimer's. And they were horribly disconcerted. But I said, look, it has been so helpful for me. I really have started to live. I exercise, I do all these things. And they began doing that too. They knew what I had been through with my mom. They knew my mom. And they are in their 30s. So they started exercise every day and they follow that even now. My son learned at age 32 by going to a cardiologist he had high LDL. So this genetic risk for Alzheimer's comes also with cardiovascular issues, which is probably why my parents had these cardiac issues. I said, look, I'm getting together my advanced directive. I know this is going to be hard on everybody, but I'm going to get you all together in December because my son and my daughter live in different states. My daughter lives closely in Ohio, my son in Utah. So I said, let's get together in December. And I was so happy. I had this document. I knew what I wanted. Boy, it was going to go so well. It couldn't have gone worse. Couldn't have gone worse. Maybe, I don't know, but I can't think of one. I sat them down, and listened to my wording. I sat them down, right? This was my story. And we went through my advanced directive for a half hour, and I said at the end, what are you thinking? My son, who had been crying for about 10 minutes, looked at me and ran out of the room. My daughter slammed down the copy of her advanced directives and said, Mom, why didn't you make me your healthcare proxy? I have the nursing background. I am the healthcare professional. I work for the CDC. And she ran out of the room. That left my husband, who to their retreating backs said, oh, you don't have to worry. We don't have to talk about this right now. And I said, yes, we do. We do. We really do. And I started crying. So it went horribly. And I think this is one of the reasons when I talk to people, they don't want to have conversations with their family because people don't like to talk about death. They don't want to be sad. And so many people I talk to say, I just told them I have an advanced directive. It's in this file folder. And or, here's a copy. Keep it somewhere safe, which of course you'll never remember where it is. And so I went to Carol and I said, Carol, help me. Help me. This was a disaster. And she said, well, did you ask your children when they wanted to have this? And what they were thinking before you did this, how they would like it? It was like the scream emoji. I said, no. I was so singularly focused on avoiding what my mother's Alzheimer's had done without an advance directive, the rift in the family with the sisters, that I was just like, get that advance directive out there. So Carol said, why don't you go back and ask them when they want to have it, how they want to have it. It was the best advice. I went back, I apologized. I said, where do you want to have it? My son said, they all said, we want to have it individually with you first, and then we'll gather as a group, because we want to ask you specific questions. And so my son wanted to sit by the river. He said preferably where a tributary flows into a river. And he said where I can cry a lot. My daughter, who I had made an advance, who I had changed my proxy to her, and she was, oh yeah, my husband, yeah, I think Courtney would be better. She said, Mom, I want to talk to you first a couple times on the phone. And then after that, it'll be okay. She said, I can compartmentalize my emotions and my love for you with my healthcare background. My husband said, let's go to a restaurant and pay the server to let us sit and have a glass of wine and some food and cry, and we'll give them extra tips, and then we can all get together. Plus, we want to do it in the spring. It's a happier time. It went so well on this one. I begged their forgiveness, and we went through the advance directive, and they asked questions, and they talked about their sadness or what was ahead. They talked about their own fear for themselves. They worried about their dad, who would be left alone. And we have had 6 or 7 conversations since 2019. And that's the thing I guess I would like to say, that it's so tempting when it goes as bad as it did. And that is so common. Steel yourself, find an ally, and go back and say, I did it wrong. Tell me about your sadness. Tell me about your feelings. So we now, when we meet, and we do it individually and then together, we run through different medical scenarios that might happen. Maybe it's a cardiac arrest. How will my advance directive play out? How can they keep me comfortable? And so
They know exactly.
they know exactly what I want, and that is front and center. I've also made a video every year, just 2 minutes, and I give it to them. And I think that gives them ballast. There's something about seeing somebody say what they hope for and why they hope for it. And that if I want my story to have a good end, you've got to help each other, not fight amongst each other, and you've got to give me the good death I want. I also learned about the doctors. Tell the doctors often, right? Don't just tell them, here's my advance directive, make sure it's in the system. We have conversations. You're entitled by this in Medicare since 2016 to a wellness visit. So talk often to the doctors. Keep your advance directive everywhere. I give a copy, even though it's the same copy, to my kids every year. They're bound to find one of them somewhere. And I keep one in my glove box. I keep one in my purse, a card. I keep one on the refrigerator for paramedics, just in case my husband isn't there. I keep it everywhere I can, so it's easy to find.
So Margaret has gone through a lot of soul searching and, trying to find what she wanted and finally got, and she feels good about that, I think.
I do feel good, I do. And Carol helped me so much. So your advance, when doing your advance directive, and half of people 65 and over don't have one, please don't leave it to chance. Please don't leave it to chance. Because when you leave it to chance, you may not have a good death.
Can one of you speak on what you used as a guide for that? Because I can only imagine being in that situation, and how do you know the answers if you don't know the questions? Can you just?
We didn't really have a guide. We just sat and talked a lot about, I think as an attorney working back then I thought it was so important for me to know what the goals and what the value system was of my client. What is important to them? Doesn't matter to me because I'm not the one that's going to go through this, but it is very valuable for them. So just talking about that and working through words and meanings of words and those kinds of things.
So are you saying it wasn't, and either one of you can answer this, it wasn't as specific as if I'm in this situation, I want this, it's more.
No, there was some of that. There was some of that. And so, yeah, what I don't like is those boilerplate forms that they just say, here, you need, the one that the doctors give you.
Just things like 5 wishes or.
5 wishes, we went through 5 wishes, we went through a lot of things. So I don't like those just forms because it just is so general. But there's a lot of clients who have some very specific wishes and needs, and we try to go through that. So if we could sort of move on, and you could talk to these 2 women forever, and they are going to stay after, so if you want to ask some more questions, we can. But I really want you to meet Cheryl as well. So Cheryl took care of her husband, who was diagnosed at, I say, a very early age, in his 50s, wasn't it, Cheryl? Late 50s?
Started late.
Yes.
Diagnosed at
Which I think is really young, with frontal lobe dementia. And I'm telling you, this gal here really took good care of him. I visited them just right before he passed, just 2 months ago. 2 months ago. 3 months
He
ago.
passed in April, but.
And she was with him every single day. She just showed so much love and kindness and caring toward him as his disease process progressed. Cheryl faced some set of different kinds of problems. Cheryl, when you got that diagnosis, what was your biggest fear at that point?
My biggest fear at that point of the diagnosis was just losing him as a companion. We'd been together since we were teenagers and married young while he was still in college. And so losing that partner and making all the decisions that was the hardest at that point in 2015. Then it wasn't difficult, though, to make the decision that I was going to take care of him, even though everyone would tell me,
He was going to stay at home.
he's going to stay at home. I'm going to take care of him. And so we started going to the Y. I'd take him to the Y with me to work on building my upper body and my legs to keep me strong first. So then when we got to the point I would need to do more physical care for him, that I would be capable of doing that. And so we did that, and I installed cameras in the house and on the outside. So if I needed to run to the store, I could go and I'd get a signal on my watch that told me he was up moving around. so that I needed to be headed back home. And this worked really well for us. Our daughters were very supportive, but they have families, they have small children, and high school kids were busy, but they helped us a lot. And went along really well until the beginning of 2020. And as I had been told by multiple people, is that what happens frequently is the caregiver becomes ill. And that's what happened. I became very ill and I couldn't care for him. So, but I thought he's going to stay at home or just get help. So I had someone coming in at night because he wandered, and that way I could get some rest. During the day, our girls would pop in and take care of what needed to be taken care of. But it's got to be too much, and so I thought, okay, 24-hour care. We're just going to have to do this. It's horribly expensive, and it was the beginning of the pandemic, and everyone was having trouble staffing. And so the last week of March, we had 8 different caregivers who came in that week. Each of those caregivers had been in somebody else's home. And it hit me. I thought, if either one of us contract COVID, nobody's going to come in here and help us. And Neil was not capable of even fixing a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or getting dressed. He had to have help. So the girls and I talked and decided it was time because we were going to have to move into a facility. We really hadn't researched that much because it was not going to be an option. That wasn't going to be what we were going to do. But fortunately, we found one within a mile of the house. Very nice. So 2 days later, we moved him in, knowing that we weren't going to see him or touch him again until they opened up the nursing homes again. And that was devastating. So at that point then, now it's hitting me, the financial part of it. Because we had multiple expenses up to this point. I know we've got a huge nursing home bill. We still have expenses for our home. I have expenses. Our 401s, we planned for retirement that had a major hit with the economy in 20. And the reality was my mom lived to be 92. And so I knew we were still in our 60s. I thought I still could have quite a few years left. So I have, I've got to figure out a way so that I can take care of myself until potentially my 90s. So that was a big hurdle, wasn't it? It was a big hurdle.
It's financial, it sounds good to say we're going to keep him at home, but the cost, and Jamie's going to be talking about some of our facilities and the cost. So that gets to be a really, really a big issue. Right. So again, you had to reach out. Was it easy to ask for help? Oh, no. I mean, you needed help to do grocery shopping and some very basic things, right?
Yes, it was, and it's not, we've both been very independent. I still am. But to all of a sudden to sit here and ask friends to do things, our girls are busy. To ask them to do more than what I really wanted to ask them to do, to reach out to an attorney, to make sure we've got all of our ducks in a row, all these things, it's very hard to, when you want to do things yourself, it's very hard to reach out.
And now that Neil has been gone though too, you've reached out to others, and that's part of the way you've been coping as well, is to reach out. So
That's the only reason, that's why I'm here, because I feel like that with what I went through, if there's ever anything that I can do that would help somebody else that it will help somebody else who is going through similar situation, This is not in my comfort zone to be sitting up here at all.
I had to pay a big bucks.
Oh, yeah, yes, yes, and obviously I'm not used to a microphone because it keeps sitting up my lap.
So you can see why I love these two women. They are very, very giving and loving people. And they have a lot of knowledge and they've been through a lot of things. But that's what we're here for. We're here to help them through. We're here to help us as a group go through some of these hard times. And I think, like I said, both of you have been a real inspiration to me as well. So I thank you very much. You can go back and sit down. So I'm left with the task of talking a little bit after they've talked about caregiving, okay? And the biggest question is, how do we make it through? Because caregiving is not easy. Caregiving does come to an end. It does take its toll. And I think we're going to see in the future that we as caregivers are going to have some physical and mental repercussions from the caregiving that we do as well. So I went to North Carolina this summer, okay, and I have a little condo down there on the lake, and I decided that I would take my own advice. You know, you're supposed to retire and stay active. So I decided I was going to learn how to drive my boat, okay? Now, most of you would say, why in the world would you at 69 plus years even attempt to drive your boat? And if any of you know or driven a boat, probably a lot of you men have, the boat goes where it wants to go, and when you turn it one way, it goes the other direction. But I was determined that I was going to learn how to not only drive that boat, but I was going to dock it on my dock. And I had to come in and make a circle around in this shallow water and take the motor up and get it alongside of the pier so that when the next time I went out, it was ready to go. Okay? No small task, right? And it took me a few times. But I'm here to talk about it. But I found that there's two things that you need when you try to drive a boat. And one of them is you're a captain. You're a captain of your boat, but you also need a co-captain, okay? Abby happened to be my co-captain many times this summer, okay? I never went out on that boat without my co-captain. And then I also took with me this long stick with a hook. Now I'll tell you, my hook down at the lake is much bigger than this one, but I was afraid they might not let me in here, thinking this might be a weapon of some kind. So this is a small hook. So you always need your co-captain, and you always need this stick with a hook on it. So I needed a co-captain because I needed a second set of eyes, ears, brains, and hands to get that boat back at the pier. And I also decided if I'm going down, somebody's going with me. What did I use this stick for? Well, for my what? Well, that's right. And you know, when you get on the boat, there's a lot of things that can happen. You know, the waves kick up, you know, it can be raining. I mean, lots of things can happen. But I used this hook because when I got too far away from the dock, I would reach over there and grab that dock and pull my boat toward the dock. Sometimes my co-captain had to use the hook because she was at the front of the boat. So between the two of us, and between switching this hook around, we would get that boat anchored to that pier.
It wasn't pretty.
It wasn't pretty. But The other thing was, I would use this stick if I got too close to another boat, or to the pier, or to a tree, or some of those things. I took this stick and pushed myself away from that, okay? So I used it to bring things closer, and I also used it to push things away. Now, you say, well, I mean, in fact, someone just said, well, what does that have to do with caregiving? Okay? You need to remember. I'll let you think about that a minute. What does that have to do with caregiving? Well, number one, you never want to be a caregiver alone. You need other people to help you through this process. And that person isn't always the same person. You might need a minister. You might need a spiritual leader. You might need an attorney. You might need a dietitian. You might need a physician. You need all of these people. So your co-captain is very important. You don't do anything without your co-captain. And they're different at different times in your caregiving process. Secondly, how do you use your stick? What does a stick do? When you're going through depression and you're going through loneliness and you think, oh, I can't take this anymore. I can't take it one more day. That's when you take that stick and you reach out to a friend or a colleague or your doctor and you say, I need some help. I need your help today. I can't take it any longer, okay? What do you use it when you push things away? What kind of things do you push away? You push away your loneliness, your depression, those thoughts we have in our head about when is this going to stop? And through our panel today, we're going to tell you some ways, Abby especially is going to tell us some ways that we can get rid of some of those thoughts, get rid of some of those anxieties, push those things out of our lives, and do some good things, okay? So you need those two things. Pretty simple, but I think if you think about it, you need your co-captain, and you need that stick with a hook on it, because you need to get those resources. Those resources could be hospitals, doctors. We as a community are trying to get those resources for you as caregivers, because we need that. We as caregivers, it's easy to say, well, just take care of yourself. Caregivers have to take care of themselves. But when you're in that process, it's much, much harder, and we don't do that. Okay? All right, so, and the other thing about caregiving is that it will stop. There will come a time, when it's going to be over. And you should look at caregiving as a time where it's a precious time that you have with that loved one. Sometimes we look at it as being a burden and a job, and let me tell you, my mom and dad they were both pistols, okay? So you put them together, it was a real treat. And they lived together for 50, I'll just tell you a secret. They would probably, I don't know what they do if they know I was telling you this, but they lived together for something like 55 years. And they filed for divorce probably 45 times. So it was not a fun childhood, let me tell you. And I was trying to juggle that the whole time. And then they got older, okay? And then, so it was a challenge. But it does come to an end. And one of the things I tried to do when I was taking care of them was to say, this will end. And I tried to make a good relationship with both of them on different levels over those years. And it's like sometimes it can be a little bit of a relief when they're gone. But that's why I try to help other people deal with some of these things as well. So caregiving does end, but look at it as a positive thing and a thing where you can make the best of it and so that you have good memories. I don't live with guilt. I did everything I could for both my mom and my dad. And I'm like, they made some choices that was not mine. But they made those choices, and I made peace with both of them before they left. So I'm not sitting here with a lot of guilt because I dealt with that at the time that they were living. Okay? So it's really sort of simple, but not really simple. But remember those two things. Your co-captain and your stick with the hook. Okay? Now I think we've been sitting here about an hour and 15 minutes. Would you like to take a 5-minute break? Get up, shake around, get some coffee, and we'll be back at 20 after and start right again because we have a lot more to go. Okay, no, we can't. I've been asked that a lot of times. No, don't Charlie and Right.
Yeah.
Also, you wait.
Well, also, yeah. He also has time. Okay. They don't see it. She's one. Yeah, they have complimentary. How old are you? She's wonderful. Great. Yeah, so you know, that's why we guys try to do. She's a geriatric life area. So that's what I mean.
They're out.
I mean,
Anyway.
yeah, so she's good because she covers the most. She'll practice in VA. One of her friends
What's gonna be fully different? And then I'm gonna write it down. Once,
Very well.
she will deliver and she will be engaged.
Thank you very much. Well, I wasn't, since I lost my vote. Thank you.
Good.
You can ask, what I have two different in-laws that have issues. My father-in-law, they were just, they called me people, and there was.
You're like, I'm the milkman stuff already. Or the egg boy.
So when he here, we bought a marriage card, he had to take her huge, that was cool. And he ended up being a program. It was just a bad situation. But, he's been living on his obligation now. He sold dinner last year, and I think he was doing medication, and now he's under control. But we've not yet gotten full bank, like, we go to geriatric, and do have that, doctor. And I think they're really like they don't call we actually took that to the doctor. So we did a little research on our, we can Google, you know. Yeah. But there were certain things that he doesn't really hit the check list for that either. But like how yeah, well, yeah, but you start like reading, getting ready, I left one of the so just executive, yeah, you can have good always got that. That's another thing. But then like my mother-in-law, she like she can't remember it. Tell her so 5 minutes later, she asks the same thing over and over and over. And she lives by herself as well. Not with the same house. Yeah, and so and my husband's a child. And so I'm like, I don't even know if and we talked to her doctor, and I don't think she realized how that about others. I don't think she'll but the others, I don't know where to go. Like, or does it matter if you don't have the age for these guys? Like, they're treating her dementia. I mean, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it does matter.
She had the magic 8 ball.
There are so much I mean, that's what we were a year ago. We tweaked some, changed some, and now we're kind of in this spot again. But no, you know, having one diagnosis. We're ready to very much too late. But the other reason that happens is just knowing what's next. Right now, so certain type of dementia happens. You
Okay, I think we want to get started again and stay on time. Okay, I think our next subject is, and our two caregivers disappeared, but I wanted to, I think if you ask them, both of them would say, having gone through the process, even though it was painful, that now they feel good about what they did.
Oh, yes.
So, it's painful as you're going through it, absolutely. But with getting help and the things you need, Cheryl took such good care of him, and Margot, with her family, they're all at an okay place. So we talked a little bit about cost. And so Jamie's our next speaker, and there's always, sometimes we as caregivers have to make some really hard decisions. I mean, Cheryl had to make a really hard decision. And everyone tells us, we want to stay at home. Dr. Elman has said we want to stay in our homes as long as we can. And I've never had one person come in my office, I don't know about you, Jamie, and say, I am ready to go to a nursing home. Get me in there tomorrow. Okay. So we usually, but that's not always the best decision. And so it has a lot of, there's a lot of issues that we have to look at and think about when we have to make those decisions. And sometimes we as caregivers have to make decisions even though our loved one resists. Okay. So, but Jamie's going to talk about it. She's going to talk about housing. What do you tell your clients about? Here's your options of places you can go, but then here's the big one. So, Jamie, you tell us about it.
So it's funny that she said, have you ever had somebody come in and say, I'm ready to go to the nursing home? I've been doing this for about 12 years. I got my start with Carol. When I joined Carol, she brought me in to do estate planning, powers of attorney, healthcare directives, living wills, trusts, probate work, things like that. And as I'm witnessing Carol helping all these people with healthcare and offsetting costs and learning what resources are out there, she was amazing at this. I went to her one day and I said, I don't want to be earmarked for this anymore. I want to learn what you're doing. And I sold her. I made her a proposition. I said, here's what we're going to do. Will you work with me on this, and will you teach me? And I was very fortunate that she said yes. And then since then, I've had two people. I had one gentleman who said, I'm ready for the nursing home. He sat in the car while his wife came in the office because he couldn't come in. And it was a good decision for him, and he was ready. He'd been in and out of the hospital a number of times and just had learned his limitations. And then I had one woman, and this is kind of a fun IU story. She had been a house mom for a sorority at IU. And so she hadn't had a home of her own. She lived with all these sorority sisters and kind of ran the house for years. Before that, she had done all the landscaping or all the flowers around IU, which I can only imagine was a huge job because they change them all the time. And then when she finally retired from being a house mom, she spent a year traveling around to visit her family and different people because she didn't have a home base anymore. And she finally came in my office and she said, all right, I've made my rounds and I miss the sorority. I miss living with a group of people and having activities and things to do and that constant camaraderie. She said, so I'm looking for an assisted living facility that's going to offer me all those things. They're going to have a little happy hour at 5 and we're going to play bridge and they're going to take us on road trips. And she found what she was looking for, which is a whole different perspective than most people. And I still tell that story to a lot of my clients today because it's a really interesting way to look at things. And I'm not saying that it's everybody should go to a facility or think that way, but I think a lot of people fight it for so long that they can't take advantage of some of the services that are out there. We don't want to admit when we start struggling with things or we need more resources, we don't extend the hook, right? So it's just interesting to, think about her and think about that story. And I came home and I told my husband, just so you know, I'm going early. I want to go to the happy hour and I want to go on the activities. I don't want to go when it's too late. I want to take that mentality with me a little bit because there are a lot of people who stay in their homes and stay isolated and they decline faster because of it. So, it's how you look at the world and how you look at your situation, and that's not right for everybody, but it's an interesting perspective. So I thought I'd share that story. The other thing I wanted to share with you is during the break, someone came up and they said, where do I go for a list of resources for these doctors, for these, community resources? And maybe you can speak on this next. I'm hoping you can. But, over the last 12 years, at different times, I've told Carol, you need a Carol's Black Book. Because she's a phenomenal resource. And so many people come to us and ask that exact question. And that's a really hard thing. And there isn't just one. There are a few places that can probably offer those kind of resources. But I want to talk a little bit about housing before we get into that. So there are different types of housing for elderly or people with health issues. Obviously, most people want to stay in their homes. I know from the last time I bought a house, finding a nice ranch home is hard. They're like unicorns. So finding an accessible home as you age can be difficult. With that said, there are some great communities in Indiana. You hear about the Del Webbs and these retirement communities where you can still own your own home, but maybe you don't have to do the landscaping. Maybe you have a community center that brings in resources and does events like this and does outings and things like that. Those are great options if that's right for you. And then there's things like independent living. We call it a continuum of care. We start independent, then maybe we need assisted living or memory care, and then maybe someday a nursing home. We have all of those things in Indiana, and there's some more creative ones coming about recently in the community. There's also something called respite care. And so I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but if you're a caregiver and you're caring for someone and maybe you need a break, maybe it's the holidays and you're trying to host Thanksgiving and you just need time to clean and cook, or maybe you're going on a vacation and that person can't go with you. Respite care is something that a lot of these facilities will do where they'll have a room, kind of like a hotel room. It's fully furnished where your loved one can go and stay for a week or so, and you can have a break. And it also gives people a chance to maybe try out the living situation. Does it work for that individual? Do they find friends there? Do they like having, the food available and the social available? If it's something you're considering or something you just need a break, that's an option, and it's worth making phone calls about that. I know there's a lot of people who don't realize that's an option out there. But then the question becomes, are these living facilities, are these different options, are they fulfilling the needs of our elderly community, or community of people who need healthcare? And for me, the biggest thing on that is staffing. And I was thinking about talking today. I was actually looking more into this. And, most people probably don't realize there is no state or federal minimum staffing requirement for these facilities. That to me is amazing to think about. How can there not be a requirement? So if you were looking at, let's say, an assisted living facility, you might walk in and say, well, how many staff do you have for your residents? Let's say they say 1 in 4. Well, are those caregivers? Are those CNAs? Are they certified healthcare providers? Or are those janitors and receptionists? You've got to dig into that question if you're ever looking into these facilities and what their staffing levels are. That's really important for those of you that are in politics in our community. That's really important. And I actually saw a statistic that said nursing homes with higher averages of nursing care per day have higher overall ratings, better health inspection ratings, and fewer instances of abuse. So you're talking about better care, cleanliness, and less abuse. And we have a huge aging population. So you might have seen me like texting while I was sitting here because I wanted some statistics to share with you guys. So Fidelity did a survey back in 2022, and a 65-year-old couple, oh, sorry, that's not the one I wanted to give you. Back in 2020, 16.5% of Hoosiers were over the age of 65. Over 16%. And 7.9% of them were in poverty. And that's expected to increase to 22% by 2040. So that's almost a quarter of our population that's going to be over 65 and needing this care. And we already have a staffing shortage. Also, Carol being a nurse, she can tell you that there's not enough nurses. The nursing school only admits a certain number of people, and it's not enough. So there's definitely some issues there. And then these staff in these facilities, if you were to dig in, what are they being paid? These are not well-paid individuals, and they're doing really, really hard, not glamorous jobs, okay? So finding the ones that have the heart for it and are willing to do it for low pay, there's just not enough of them. There's really high turnover. There's all kinds of issues with this and with the staffing of these. So I don't know how you solve that from a political standpoint, but I'd love to have that discussion, and I think we need more focus on it and more power behind it. And then 2/3 of those in nursing homes are on Medicaid. So we're going to talk about the costs and what that means, but I'll get into that in just a minute. Let's see. Oh, the other thing I wanted to talk about with fulfilling needs, there is an ombudsman program in Indiana. And the focus of the ombudsman program is really about resident-centered care. So this is a great resource. If you or someone you love is in a facility or is getting care and you don't feel like they're getting the care that they need, check out the ombudsman program in Indiana. They can be your advocate. They can help you come up with a care plan that's centered on that individual person, and they know what that nursing home or that assisted living facility is required to do to meet those needs. It's a fantastic resource in Indiana that I encourage you to check out. So then, when we talk about accessibility of housing, cost comes into play a lot. So I have a handout here that talks about the numbers. You're welcome to grab one of those, or I can pass it around. But I just want to give you some of these numbers because they're pretty staggering. Now, this was 2 years ago, okay? This was 2021. So I know my grocery bill's gone up in 2 years. I just had to change the battery in my car over the weekend. I couldn't believe what it cost. Costs across the board are going up. So in my opinion, these numbers are low, okay? So in-home care, it says it's about $5,000 per month for 44 hours a week, okay? So $5,000 a month is about 6 hours a day, roughly. Now, I had a loved one who was in their home and needed 12 hours a day, needed someone there when she got up till about the time she got back in bed to make sure she was safe, she was eating, she was getting the things she needed, she couldn't drive, it was mostly a safety issue. But so 12 hours a day, you're talking about maybe $10,000 a month. Let's say that person needs someone there at night, so it's 24 hours a day. Now we're talking $20,000 a month. And our financial advisor over here is going to talk about this, I'm sure, but how many of you have a financial advisor who tells you these numbers? Right, okay. Good, we've got one. So, there's a small percentage of these guys out there who really understand what long-term care costs. Most of them just talk about long-term care insurance and how expensive it is. But let's talk about the alternative. What does it cost if we have to pay for this? Then there's adult daycare centers that average about $1,600 per month. That's what you think of for daycare, but it's aimed towards adults, so they have a safe place to go and activities and things to stimulate that individual. Then assisted living was about $4,500 a month. That was 2 years ago, keep in mind, so $4,500 a month. For assisted living, then semi-private nursing home was about $7,000 a month, and a private room in a nursing home about $9,000 per month. And I've really seen upwards of $11,000, $12,000 per month in this area. I do think these numbers can be low. They could probably be a little high depending on what facility you're looking at and what your care needs are. So I don't know how many people are, planning for $10,000 a month of care in their home or $9,000 a month of care in a facility, but those are pretty steep prices. So luckily there are programs out there to help these individuals. And, well, we'll get into that. So,
And Jeannie, that's for one person.
yes, and that's for one person. So for a married couple, that can be even more challenging. And as our caregiver down here talked about, you know, a lot of times our clients come in for their spouse. And they're saying, you know, I'm caring for this person, it's costing me a fortune. You know, maybe I'm thinking my longevity is another 30 years. How am I going to afford to live? You know, how much of this am I going to burn through? And then what am I going to do? You know, sometimes people come in feeling like they have to sell the shirt off their back to afford their loved one's care. And that's not necessarily the case. There are programs out there that I just wish people knew to ask about ahead of time. So your options are private pay, okay? Buy long-term care insurance, which my experience is that most financial advisors or people who sell long-term care insurance don't even recommend it because it's so expensive, or a lot of these companies have gotten out of the old long-term care insurance market. It's also really difficult to file claims against these policies. So that has its own issues. I still think they're great. When I see them pay out, they're fantastic, but not everybody has bought into those programs. So then there's other options. One being VA aid and attendance. So I used to call this the VA's best kept secret. I don't know if that's still the case, but this is a handout that shows what the VA might pay towards your care. If you were a wartime veteran, all you have to do is serve 1 day during that war period. You can be stationed in Indiana, sitting at a desk, and still qualify. Or if you're the surviving spouse of a veteran. This is not something you have to purchase. It's just there for you if you meet certain requirements. And it can be up to, this year it's up to about $2,200 per month for a veteran, over $2,600 per month for a veteran and a spouse. A surviving spouse, it's about $1,400 per month, tax-free money in your pocket to pay for your healthcare expenses. Most people don't know about this, but this is a check you get in the mail monthly if you qualify. So I love this for home care. I love this for assisted living, or just kind of offsetting some of those costs if you're incurring those. So if you or your spouse served, definitely learn about that. Know it's out there. Most people don't even know about it. The other one is Medicaid. So there are so many myths about Medicaid. Most of the time people come in and they say, well, that's just for people who are poor and in a nursing home, right? You have to spend down all your assets. You can't have anything. That is not true. There are almost 40 Medicaid programs in the state of Indiana. And some of those programs are meant to help you in your home. Okay, so most people, the goal is stay in my home as long as possible. Medicaid can help you do that. And you don't necessarily have to deplete your assets to qualify for that kind of help. So there's a program called Medicaid Waiver. It can cover you in your home. It can cover you in assisted living. Or then you could move into traditional Medicaid, which is for a nursing home. But if you're in your home, you know, it could deliver meals. It could provide home modifications so that maybe you need a walk-in shower or a ramp, grab bars, doorways opened to get your walker or wheelchair through, those kind of things. They could help provide that. And then the biggest thing is care. You know, they might pay your loved ones to take care of you. So maybe your daughter or your son has to quit their job or is taking a salary cut to help provide care in your home. Or maybe, you know, maybe it's even your spouse. I've heard of spouses getting paid for care. You know, there are programs that can help, or maybe it's a third party. Maybe you've hired a company to come in and provide care to you in your home. It could potentially pay for that too. Most clients, I say, this is not full-time care in your home. It's up to usually a max of about 40 hours or 40 hours a week. I just had a client getting 20 hours a day in their home. And I tell the daughter every day, I'm like, I have no idea how you pulled this off. That is rare. It is not supposed to cover that much care. Somehow she pulled it off, but it's still a great service that can keep you healthy, can keep you in your home, can keep you independent longer. So I would encourage you to look into these programs to learn ahead of time, especially with a married couple. You can typically keep assets and qualify for these programs if you plan for it, if you know how to structure your estate, how to structure your assets so that you qualify for the programs. You do not have to just spend everything you own until your spouse sells the shirt off their back. Okay, so I won't get into all the details on that, but just want you to know that those programs are available. How much time do I have? 5 minutes? Okay. And then the last topic I wanted to talk about is, staying in your home, whether you're on this program or not. Is it possible? Can you stay home forever? How do you do that? And what are the drawbacks to that situation? So the key to staying in home is really that team, having that hook and using it, right? Look at your situation. Do you have a lot of family around? If not, do you have other support systems, friends, a church? Who is it that is going to provide that support to you in your home as you age in place? So that if you can't get to the store, if you need to get to a doctor's appointment, if you fall, what do you have available to help you there? Having that support team is huge. I refer often to what's called a geriatric care manager. There are a number of them throughout the area. Some of them are social workers, some of them are RNs, but they are fantastic resources that can come in and assess the situation and say, okay, here's resources that are going to help you. They can connect you to doctors. They can connect you to places like Prime Life or Shepherd Center or the YMCA programs that are going to help you. It really just across the board. I even refer to them in situations where maybe someone shouldn't be driving anymore, but the family needs a third party to come in and evaluate that and be the bad guy. Geriatric care managers can be a huge resource and can help you figure out how to stay at home and to build that team, to build that little black book. Community centers, if you're going to stay home, how do you stay a part of the community and fight isolation, emotional issues that can come with that? Adult day services, I mentioned earlier. And then the other thing I would say is, staying in your home isn't always the best option. We all want to, but sometimes it works to our detriment. I've had clients who are happier after they move. They move to assisted living and they start to get better. They start to make friends. They enjoy the community. They enjoy the activities. They go off their anxiety medicines or whatever it is because their quality of life actually improves. Not everybody, but it happens. So you have to kind of look at the individual and what their needs are and assess whether maybe that would help them. And then, staffing. So let's say you need care in your home and your goal is to stay home as long as possible and I'm going to bring in care. Well, that's great. But what if that caregiver gets sick? What if they don't show up? What if they get in a car accident on the way to your house? Do you have the other support system? Do you have the family, the friends, the church crew, whoever it is that can come over and help you during that time? That is probably the biggest challenge I see with home care is that you cannot rely on it 100%. You just can't. Things come up. We all have messy lives, even our caregivers. So that to me, it all goes back to staffing. There is not enough of these people to go around. And then safety, making sure that the environment is safe and that you can stay there. Last but not least, are the right housing services readily available? Can we access those services? We talk about this a lot in my office. Do not wait for a crisis. There are times that people come in and when they leave, I hang my head and I say, they're going to wait for the crisis. because they're not ready to talk about it. They're not ready to think about it. Even if we plan to stay in our home and we create all the things to keep us safe and healthy there, what if you end up in the hospital and the doctor won't release you home? Where do you go? And, Carol will probably attest to this. We see it a lot where, it's Friday and the care managers call in the team and they say, your insurance isn't going to cover you anymore. You have to find somewhere to go by Monday. So we constantly encourage people to learn about these housing situations ahead of time. Go show up and walk around unannounced. Are the people smiling? Are they greeting people? When someone walks down the hallway, are they saying, hey, Sue, how's your day? Or are they kind of growling and stomping around? Also, what is admission like? Do they have a wait list? Can you even get in 3 days if you need to? Is there a private pay requirement? If you want to tap into these benefits right away, are they going to make you private pay for 2 years first? What are the requirements? So know the facilities, know the ones you like, just learn the community, and not all the facilities offer the same levels of care or the same resources. I had an uncle who needed dialysis. He had really limited options. Geriatric care managers are a great resource for this as well. They know the ins and outs of the facilities and the changes going on in that community. But I would encourage everybody to be their own advocate. If I was in the hospital and I couldn't go home, I would want to know where to go. I wouldn't want to have some hospital staff just choose an open bed for me. Okay. So, empower yourself with knowledge and learn the community for you or for your loved one in the future is really, really important.
Thank you, Jamie. That was great. And just on a lighter note, rumor has it that sometimes you find a later in life mate in some of those nursing and assisted care. And I understand there's a program on TV called Senior Bachelor or something, or Senior whatever. So, I'm just saying, I've heard that. And I've heard some of these nursing homes have Friday nights are really great places. So haven't experienced it, but. So thank you, Jamie. That's a good. Now, so our next question, the other question that I always get or used to get in my office a lot was, am I going to outlive my money? My money's going really, really fast. And am I going to have enough to pay for all of this? So that is a big, big question. And Jeanette has flown in from Florida to tell us about her little secrets about how do we have enough money to pay for our care. But then what if we didn't plan enough? What can we do? So Jeanette, thank you so much for coming.
Sure, thank you, Carol. Okay, how many of you have that concern? Will I outlive my money? That's the number one concern when we survey retirees 65 and older. That's the number one concern. And the second concern, I created a company that specializes with women because my friends, 80% of women die single. That has a completely different financial implication. And even 80% of men die married, which means the wife is the caregiver. And very few men, even I've seen it in our households, where there is long-term care, the women will not put their husbands in long-term care. They will stay at home and they want to bring the care in their home to help take care of them. It's just the nurturing nature of who we are as women. So I'm going to talk to y'all about a couple things. There's a little diagram back there, and I'm going to make all these resources available to you at no cost to you. So there's no hitch because I'm here to empower people. So everything that all of these individuals talked about, whether they're the stories from the caregivers, the attorneys, the neurologists, the doctors, I've experienced them all. Because I had 3 decades of caregiving. I was a caregiver to my mother and my aunt for 30 years. And it's pretty interesting because the cost of that journey is a significant impact. And the caregiver who gets sick, This caregiver got sick while taking care of 2 family members while I was a corporate executive. So the turmoil it takes on the households. My mother lived to 93 and my aunt to 100. So I am here as a product of a message that I want to send, and I speak nationally to say, give everybody a wake-up call that says, you know what? 95 is going to be here. You're going to be the fastest growing segment of the U.S. population is a 90-plus segment. Just think about that. And there's a neurological study called the 90-plus study that I followed and that I talked to people about. You can Google it, and it's amazing research that they have come up because medical practice patterns have never been, didn't understand them about how to practice medicine on 85-year-olds or 80-year-olds because the average age, the average lifespan was maybe, 72, 75. And now we have all of these studies that we have to conduct on 85, 90, 95-year-olds. And that's the beauty of medicine. We're starting to see more people. But let me talk to you about how to protect yourself. And again, it's all about holistic planning. I retired after a 38-year career in the corporate world. And it's pretty interesting. Then I tried to get the last 3 years of my mother's life cost me $250,000 out of my pocket, over $250,000, because I did make that decision. They were going to age in place. And then the last 3 years, I was hiring caregivers to come in when I couldn't do it because I was traveling on business. I paid more for caregivers. Don't make that decision lightly. It would have been a lot more cost effective for me to put her in a facility because she could have qualified for government support because my dad left her with no life insurance, no assets or mortgage, and a $542 Social Security check. That was it. So that's poor planning. That's why I became a really good planner. And I define financial planning holistically. Take one of these home. It's about the integrated approach to your money. How do you not outlive your money? You create for yourself a holistic financial plan. A bunch of brokerage statements, investment products that you might have, financial statements, I call a collection of investments. It's not a guarantee to success because when you think about your estate planning, we talked about making sure you have the right advance directives, the trust, the will. We talk about the proper estate planning, but what about asset protection type of estate planning? So when you are a couple, are you willing to spend all of your financial assets on the first one of you to get sick? Or do you want to figure out how to protect assets for the survivor? Very critical. So when you think of the 4 cornerstones of holistic planning, it's life planning. It has nothing to do with financials. I say to many when I'm speaking, I say it's more than the money. It's about total well-being, and total well-being is defined by you. What your goals are. What's the purpose of your money? Do you want to leave money behind? Do you want to give to charities? Do you want to protect each other? Do you want to spend it down till the last, dollar that you have? Yeah, everybody's saying, yeah, we've taken care of those kids. So estate planning, think about it much differently. And those of you who do have estate plans, well, one of the first things we do is we look and say, all right, you have a trust. What's the trust funded by? And then we find that there's all kinds of gaps in the trust because the attorneys might have created a trust for you, sent you home and given you what's called funding instructions. A trust is no good if it's a shell, if it doesn't have assets attached to it to protect them to achieve your wishes and goals. So don't think of estate planning in the context of, I've got advance directives, I have a healthcare power of attorney, I have a living will, I have a pour over will.